Hello, and welcome to this exciting how to play video for the board game First in Flight, a 1 to 4 player game designed by Matthew O'Malley and Ben Rossett and published by Artana. As players in First in Flight, you will assume the role of early aviation pioneers at the start of the 20th century. You'll have a small deck of cards that represents your basic flyer, and throughout the course of the game you'll be taking actions to improve upon that basic flyer by spending both time and money, which are resources in the game. Just know that some of those actions may end up incorporating a design flaw or two that, if left unchecked, could cause you to crash. But hopefully once you're up in the air, you'll have the experience and the skills necessary to stay up in the air, setting further and further flight records until the end of either 4 years, or if a player ever reaches a flight track record of 40 or greater, at which point everybody will take one final flight action, and afterwards the player who has flown the farthest, set the furthest record, is declared the winner of the game. Let's check out the setup. Please note that my copy of the game, which was provided by the publisher, has card sleeves and board clips that were not included with the game. To begin, place your game board on the side matching your player count. One side is for 1 to 3 players and the other side is for 4 players, as shown by the cup icon in the lower left corner. Then place your time round tracker on year 1. Next, separately shuffle the 3 decks of development cards for friend, technology, and skill cards. Reveal 2 cards for the friend deck, 2 cards for the technology deck, and 4 cards for the skill deck, and place them on the designated sides of your game board. The game insert also doubles as a handy tray for cards, with a sticker pack included that allows players to mark each of the different decks. Please note that this setup may look differently if you sleeve your cards, and if that is the case, you will have 2 sections for the glide cards and no flaw discard section. Please note that your glide cards, your experience cards, and your basic flight cards will be face up in their respective sections. No need to shuffle them. Next, shuffle your upgrade cards to form a face down deck in their section. And then lastly, shuffle your design flaw cards and place them in a face down section as well. Randomly choose a first player. There are no special rules for this, but if you'd like one, the first player can be the person who most recently flew on an airplane or wore goggles. Next, each player will choose a player color, then take the player mat that will match that color based on this flag over here, and make sure to take the pilot pawn and the flight tracker token that will match that color. In this instance, this player mat is blue, as indicated by this flag. Once they have those 3 items, they will also take a descend card. These descend cards all look the same, with a descend card action on the front and a reminder on the back that should you have any design flaws in your garage, make sure to shuffle them back into your flight deck before you take flight. Unless you have a special pilot, which has a unique descend card, this will be the card that you start with. Each player's basic flyer is represented by a starting deck of 9 flight cards. That consists of 4 of these glide cards, 1 of these experience cards, and 4 of these design flaw cards, which will be added to your deck face down. You will not know what they are. You will make sure to shuffle all these cards together to form your face down flight deck, which you will put beside your player mat. And lastly, each player will select a pilot card. These pilot cards may be drafted randomly by choosing a number of cards equal to the number of players plus 1, then having players take turns selecting a pilot card in reverse turn order, starting with the 4th player and so on. Place your pilot card on the appropriate section of your player mat with the blue side face up. After that, the start player will be the person who starts in the leftmost space here. As you can tell on this board, the blue player is in the furthest left space, so therefore they are the first player. Since we know this is the blue player here, that means that the first player will start with 6 coins. The orange player, the second player, will start with 7 coins. The white player, who is the third player, will start with 8 coins. If this was a 4-player game, the fourth player would start with 9 coins. You may be wondering why there are 3 additional coins down here, and that's because this player's pilot gets a special ability where at the beginning of each year, they gain 3 additional coins. So this player will actually start with 9 coins, but that's only because of that pilot card, not because of any other reason. Otherwise, they'd start with 6 coins. And that completes your setup. Just as a quick overview before we get started, each player should have a player mat matching their color, a pilot pawn also matching their color, and a flight tracker token at the start of this flight track. The pilot token should be at the start of the action track, remembering that the leftmost token is the starting player. And then players should have a number of coins based on their turn order. They should have a pilot card, gaining any bonuses that that pilot card may provide at the start of the game. They should have a descend card, and then they should have a flight deck of 9 cards. Those 9 cards should be 4 glide cards, 1 experience card, and 4 design flaw cards that will not be viewed. They will actually be shuffled into the deck unseen, and that will start the game. Let's move on to gameplay. Starting with the leftmost, furthest back player pawn, players will move their pawns clockwise around the action track, completing an action or actions depending on how far back they are, spending time or money to pay for these actions, and then play will continue to the player with the leftmost pawn. A couple of rules about movement. You can move as far along as you want to on the action track, but you can never go backwards counterclockwise. You cannot move to a space with an action that you cannot afford to take. You cannot move to an action space that is occupied by another player's pawn, except time spaces, which are not action spaces, but more on that later. And if your pawn is lying face down from a crash after a flight, then you must take the recover action for 2 time, but more on that shortly. Other important notes. Play for the entire year/round will continue until all players have moved their pawns around the action track and back to the start section preparing for the next year/round. Actions with a cost are typically paid with one of 2 resources: time or money. To spend money, simply return the necessary coins to the supply. To spend time, move your pawn onto the time symbol a number of times needed to pay for that action. An example of spending time can be seen over here with the repair action, which allows you to spend either 2 time or 3 money to take this action. If this pilot pawn decides to take the time action, they will move a number of time equal to 2, meaning they will go 1 time, 2 time, and then they will be able to have completed that action. A few remaining notes is that player pawns can occupy the same time spaces, but the newest pawn will always be in front of the previous pawn to determine player order. So if the orange pawn decided to also take this action for 2 time, then they would go here, but they would end up in front of the blue player, so that way the blue player will be the next one to take an action from that space. Please note that you cannot split a single action's cost between 2 resources. You will either pay time or money, something that players might be confused about when it comes to the repair action, but we'll get into that a little later. And one last rule about action spaces is that you can only complete an action once when you land on that space. So even if you have the additional money or time, you cannot take that action a second time. Now is the time for action, and by that I mean talking about action spaces. The biggest action by far is the flight action. You'll note here on the board that there are 3 flight icons as indicated by this little plane over here. If you hold the best flight record at the end of the year round, you also get to win the Michelin Cup's top award and the prize money that comes with it. Now, we're going to rearrange the board slightly so that we can go over how a flight action takes place. We're now ready to take the flight action. Now you may notice that a couple of cards have been moved from this area over to the player's area, and the reason that is we want to show a slightly more robust version of the flight action when it takes place. So in this case, this player has acquired a friend development card and a skill development card, which they'll be able to use when they take the flight action. So we're going to have this blue pawn move to the flight action over here, and they'll start taking that action. Note that this card here, your descend card, flipped over, is a reminder that if you had any design flaw cards in your garage, you must add them back to your deck before taking your flight. But since we don't, we're going to go ahead and flip that descend card onto its side. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to shuffle our deck of flight cards to form our face down flight deck. Now, you're not going to shuffle any of your development or descend cards in there, and the publisher was clever enough to note that these cards are different sizes, so this card actually sticks out a bit and therefore would not be shuffled in. What you'll be doing on your flight is drawing flight cards one at a time, and the number in the upper left corner is going to contribute to your distance. The further you go, the better. But remember that the more you draw, the higher your chances of revealing flaw cards and potentially crashing. Please note that the first card we've drawn is an experience card. This card allows you to add 1 glide card to your flight deck straight from the draw pile that you can't see right now, but it is the section of cards where we have all those face-up glide cards. We simply add another one from that area. Then we go ahead and flip over more cards. We have another glide card, as you can see. And now we have an upgrade card. This actually is a 3, which means we are going along great, smooth sailing. And so we're going to go ahead and flip over another card. And oh no, we have reached our first design flaw. This design flaw is a delicate wing structure. And this actually counts as 2 crash icons if this is the first crash card, flaw card, to have been revealed, and it is. So unfortunately, we now have 2 crash icons. So, explaining crash icons. Each flaw card has a crash symbol. Some will have more than 1 symbol, as this one does, and if you ever accumulate 4 or more of these symbols during a flight, you will crash. And I'll explain a little bit more about that in a moment, but just know for the moment, crashing is not a good thing. After you reveal a card, you can resolve any effects, and if you haven't crashed, you still have the option of playing your descend card from your player mat to safely land, but there will be 1 additional step you have to do. But we still have only 2 crash icons, and we also have these abilities over here, so why don't we see about using one of these? This card, Daredevil, allows us to look at the top 4 cards of our flight deck, then we can draw 2 of those, and then shuffle the remaining 2 back into our deck. So we're going to go ahead and use that card by turning it on its side, exhausting that ability, and we will draw the next 4 cards in that pile. Having revealed the 4 upcoming cards, we note that 2 of them have design flaws. We certainly don't want those, so we're going to return those to our flight deck and shuffle that in just a moment after we add our glide cards. Now, as we shuffle these, we should keep in mind that if we ever again accumulate 4 or more crash icons, we will have crashed, and that is not a good thing. So I think in an abundance of caution, we're going to go ahead and play our descend card. However, before we can safely land, there's one more thing that we have to do. We have to shuffle our unplayed flight deck cards again, and then we have to reveal 2 cards. During this time, we cannot use any skill or other abilities to manipulate the outcome. So if these 2 cards are both design flaw cards, we will have crashed because we already have 2 crash icons because of the first card that we played. So let's go ahead and see what we have. Now let's go ahead and reveal these 2 cards. And we were very lucky. We had 1 glide card and 1 design flaw card. So it was very touch and go, but thankfully we managed to safely land and avoid a crash. The next thing that we're going to do is calculate our flight distance by adding the numbers in the upper left corner of our played cards, plus any bonuses that we would have from any of these cards over here. Now these cards over here are not going to yield any bonuses, but if we had had one of these cards over here, the technology cards, some of those can provide bonuses. For example, this card over here, the dihedral wing design, allows for +1 to a flight for each upgrade card in that flight. Having had 1 upgrade card, if we had this technology over there, we would have been able to fly 1 further because of that. But since we don't, we will go ahead and ignore that. So totaling up our flight here, we have 1, 2, 3, 6, 7, 8, 9, and we ended up getting 5 because we did not crash. Now if we had crashed, the crash icon in the lower corner, the 2, would have been the number we added. And then we have 1, 2 over here. So we end up having 7 here, and there was 9 over here. So that ends up bringing our total flight total to 16, which is a pretty solid number. So we're going to go ahead and take our flight icon over here, and we're going to move over to 16. Now note that whenever you cross 15, your pilot becomes famous. And we'll explain that in just a moment. Congratulations! Your pilot is now famous. And what that means is you're going to take your pilot card over here and you're going to flip it from its blue normal side to its gold famous side. You will also get to do a one-time benefit located over here. In this case, this player would actually get to take an any action, meaning they could take any action over here on the board and complete that action. So if they wanted to, say, purchase a skill card for 2 coins, they could go ahead and take that action, spend the 2 coins, and that would be for free. Additionally, you'll notice that their ability has been upgraded, so now they actually get 5 coins at the start of every year as opposed to 3 coins. Then you can go ahead and once you've completed your bonus action, place your pilot card back. But right now, since this is a teachable game, we're going to do one more thing. Let's say that we were not so lucky, and instead of drawing a glide and a flight problem card, let's say that instead we drew 2 flaw cards. So in this case, let's say we had drawn these cards. Unfortunately, this now meant that we have 4 crash icons, so we would have crashed. Our flight would not have gone as far as it had. Instead, we would have only gone 1, 2, 3, 6, 7, 8, 9. They'll only get the 2 for here, so that would be 11, 12. We would have only gone 12, so as you can see, we would not have become famous. Note that this track over here is not cumulative, meaning that you only raise it whenever your next flight is further than the previous one. So if my next flight is 18, then I would move it to the 18 spot. But if my next flight was 12, it would remain where it is at 16. Whenever your pilot crashes, remember that they are going to go face down on the board, and then on their next turn, they're going to have to spend time to recover their senses. In this case, the next time that the blue player is able to go, what they would end up having to do is go 1, 2 times, so they would have to skip over this any space, so they would go 1, 2, and then they could prop themselves back up and be ready to go. If for some reason they are still the furthest left player, then they would get to take another action. However, if they are not, they will have to wait until the next player has taken their action, and so on until they are the furthest left player. And lastly, cleanup. Make sure to set aside your descend card And then you can move up to 2 of your revealed design flaw cards into your garage so that they can be repaired on a future turn. Note that the left garage space is cheaper. So in this case, we are going to choose to take this card and put them in there. But remember, we only can have space for 2, so the rest of them are going to go back into our flight deck. We will now take the rest of our flight cards and we will shuffle them up and create our flight deck once again. And then we're going to flip our descend card over as a reminder to make sure to incorporate them back in on your next flight. And there's one last thing that you do whenever you do cleanup. If you have any of these green cards that have been used, you can go ahead and refresh them because you are able to use them on your next flight. Now that we've covered the flight action and the recover action, let's go ahead and discuss the repair action. So for the repair action, and you'll note here that it is the wrench icon, and there are a couple of places where that is allowed, we're going to go ahead and move our pilot over to that action. And what they're going to do next is they're either going to spend 2 time or 3 money in order to take that repair action. Now in this case, we're going to go ahead, and since we have quite a bit of money, we're going to spend 3 money and put those back in that section and take the repair action. And what the repair action allows us to do is allow us to turn these design flaw cards, which can do some nasty things when we're up in the air, into a basic flight problem card. These basic flight problem cards still have a crash icon, but they won't do anything else problematic other than potentially causing us to crash. So doing the leftmost action over here, I would take that card and switch it out, and then this card would be discarded face up into a design flaw pile where all design flaw cards will go. Now, I have the option of spending an additional coin if I want to repair this card as well. I'm going to go ahead and do that. So I would take this coin, spend that as well, and then this card would also go away and be replaced with a basic flight problem. Remember, this card's going to remind you to shuffle these back into your deck before you do your next flight. But there's one last thing I want to make sure to bring to your attention. You'll note that every time you repair a card, it gives you a little bonus. Repairing these flaws give you special card abilities. In this case, repairing this card gives you a free technology card. So we're going to go ahead and choose this as a bonus and add it to our area. This card over here gives us a free upgrade card. So we are going to draw a face down upgrade card, and we are going to add that to our flight deck as well. Note that when you add upgrade cards in this manner, you do not get a design flaw, which I'll explain in the next action. One last thing that I want to mention is that you cannot move or swap design flaws between your garage spaces. So once you place a design flaw in a section, it is there until it is shuffled back in the next flight. And now let's discuss the upgrade action. Speaking of upgrade cards, you think you found a way to upgrade your engine's design and fly faster and farther than before. Hopefully the rewards outweigh the risks and there are no serious flaws in your new design. To take an upgrade action, pay 2 or more time or money. The icon for upgrades, you'll notice, have a little engine icon, so we're going to have our player move over to this section here, and we're going to have them pay 3 coins, and we'll explain why in just a minute. And now that the player has taken the upgrade action, I think now is a good time to bring this little organizer back so that you can see exactly what it is that we're doing. We've taken the upgrade action, we've paid 3 coins, and now we're going to draw 1, 2, 3 upgrade cards. We're going to look at them, and we get to keep 2 of these cards. Now, had we taken this action, which always requires a minimum of 2 time or 2 money, we could draw 2 cards and then we would keep both. But having paid 3, we have an option of looking, and because we did this action this way, we saw that the first card drawn was a 2, but the next 2 were a 4 and a 3, which are much better. So we're going to keep the 4 and 3 and add those to our flight deck, returning the 2 to the deck. But now that we have an upgrade, we must unfortunately add a design flaw. So we will draw 1 design flaw card face down and also add that card to our flight deck. Remember, we do not get to see what that design flaw was, so make sure not to look at it when you add it to your flight deck. Another quick note about the action spaces that have a slash icon on them is that they allow you to choose one of those actions to perform, but never both. So for example, this icon here gives you the option of either gaining 2 coins or taking the repair action for 3 coins. This one over here gives you a glide card for free from here, or you can pay 3 coins to gain an experience card for your flight deck. And now let's discuss the development cards. You've attended engineering symposiums, flight training, and rubbed elbows with fellow aviation aficionados. Time to reap those benefits. So pay the coin cost shown on that action and then gain a development card of the type shown. And you can either take face up or a random card from the top of that respective deck. If you take a face up card, do not reveal a new card. The next person will have to choose from either the remaining face up cards or draw from the top of the deck. A note about the different types of cards and how they're used. Friend cards have abilities that are used once per year or round. Skill cards have abilities that can be used once per flight before you descend. And technology cards, which have an infinity symbol at the top, can be used the entire time. They are always in effect. And whenever you use a card for its ability, you will take it and you will turn it on its side to indicate it has been used. And lastly, we have the any action spaces, which allow you to do whatever you want. The any action allows you to copy any other action space, and it can be an action space that has been occupied by another player. It doesn't matter. You merely have to pay the 1 coin cost to take the any action plus whatever the cost is of the space that you wish to copy. So if I wanted to take this action space over here, and then let's say that I wanted to take this skill card acquisition space here, I would have to pay 1 coin here and 2 additional coins in order to take this action. But as you can see, I only have 2 coins remaining. So let's say instead I decide to take the 4 coin action space. I would still, of course, need to make sure I could pay 1 coin up front in order to take the action, and then I would gain 4 coins back, essentially giving me a net gain of 3 coins. And that is an overview of all the actions you will find on the action track. Play will continue between players where the player who is the furthest back on the action track will take the next turn until players have reached the end of the action track and then return to the start area for the next year or round. Let us look at how a year ends. Say that we have our pawns, our players here. Now, let's say that the next player chooses to take the any action here for free. As you can see that there's no cost associated with this one. They decide that they're going to take the action over here and they will gain a face down technology card by paying 2 coins. And let's say they go ahead and take that. And then we move on to the next player who decides that they want to take the repair action here and they want to spend 2 time in order to do that repair action. So they'd go 1, 2, and this is where they would go. And then this player here, knowing that these other spaces are blocked, decides that they instead are going to just go ahead and start the next round. So the blue player is going to go and end up in the furthest left space located over here, which means that they will be the start player for the next year. Then we would go on to the next furthest back player, which is the orange player. They will move into the second spot. And the white player, having spent the most time this year doing different actions, will of course be the last player to start the following year. So now we have our next year started. Now let's discuss the end of the year. When all players have returned to this area, the year ends. And if this is the first, second, or third year, the Michelin Cup awards prizes to each player. Noting over here that the player with the best or highest flight record will get 7 coins, the second best will receive 5 coins, and everybody else will receive 4 coins. And that does apply even if they did not fly during this year. We would then advance the year tracker by 1 by moving it to the right. We would discard any remaining development cards, whether they are friend, technology, or skill cards that did not get taken, and we would replace them with new cards. Remember that there are 4 skill cards that go out. There are 2 friend cards that go out. And there are 2 technology cards that go out. In the event that there were no more cards to draw, we would then shuffle the discarded cards to form a new deck and then draw from that. We would reset any remaining exhausted cards. So say I had used this friend card during the year, I could then reset that card so that they are ready to be, their ability is ready to be used on the next year. And that is how each year will play out, with player pawns starting with the leftmost pawn, moving around the action track, taking actions, setting flight records, acquiring friends, technology, and new flight skills, upgrading their engine cards with design flaw cards added in as well, taking flights, potentially becoming famous, winning the Michelin Cup, and a lot of other actions that happen during each year. But if this happens to be the 4th and final year, then something different happens. The game ends at the end of the 4th year round, or when any player sets a flight record of 40 or greater, which is why the 40 icon over here is also highlighted in gold. If a player ever reaches a flight record during a flight action that is 40 or greater, then this triggers the end of the game. At that point, all players will take one final fly action, meaning they will take their flight deck and take the flight action as usual, shuffling all their cards together, flipping one out one at a time, resolving any design flaws, utilizing any skill cards, and eventually deciding to either play a descend card or continue to press their luck and hope that they do not crash, which will force them to descend. And the player with the greatest or highest flight record is the winner. In the event of a tie, the player that triggered the final flight, if it was before the end of year 4, is the winner. Otherwise, the victory is shared. Note there's one other important thing if you're playing a 2-player game. You will introduce a bot character named Gustave, who is used to keep players on their toes, as he also competes for actions and resources. During setup, you will assign a tracker and pilot pawn of the same color to Gustave and place his pilot pawn on the farthest right starting space. He will start last. In this case, we have decided to make Gustave the white player over here, so his pawn is in the furthest right section. You can use the Gustave card on either its standard or its advanced side. You can note that by the number of stars, 1 star for standard and 2 stars for advanced. He will not need to use a player mat, flight card, or coins. On Gustave's turn, he will move to the next available action space. So let's say that we had players who had taken these actions on their turns. Now that Gustave is on the farthest left, he will go ahead and move to the next open action space, taking that action. So what does he do when he goes to a space? Well, if that space is either a fly action or an any action, we would increase Gustave's flight record by 3 on the standard side. So let's say that he took one of these actions over here, we would go ahead and increase his flight tracker, which is white, to the 3 space. If he ever lands on one of those spaces again, he will again increase it by 3. If he ever goes to a development card space like he did here, then he ends up removing the bottommost card matching that type. He favors technology over friends if there is a choice that needs to be made. So in this case, he would take this card and add it to his area. The reason that you do not discard them into the box is because there are certain player cards that can sometimes benefit from what other players have. So just make sure to add them all to a pile that he has in case it ends up being something that someone needs. If Gustave takes any other type of action space, such as a card space, or a money space, or a repair space, or an upgrade space, he takes no action and gains no benefit. He will always take additional actions if it is still his turn. An example of that is if the players are here, then Gustave would take this space, which again doesn't give him any additional benefit, but then he would move to the flight action, which would allow him to increase his flyer by another 3 points. If it is the end of that year, you will increase his flight record by 4 before awarding the Michelin Cup prizes. So right now, with him being at a 9, if we increased it to 4, he would have 13. Now, if there are any players that are further than him, they of course would get the better award for the Michelin Cup. But if Gustave was in first place, then he would essentially receive that award and the other players would have to settle for second or third place prize money. Please note that Gustave can trigger the end of the game if his flight tracker ever reaches or exceeds 40. At the end of the game, Gustave will take his fly action bonus one final time. In this case, if he triggered it exactly at 40, he would then take the action and end up at the 44 space on the standard side. If at the end of the one final flight bonus action, if Gustave still has the highest standing flight record, he wins the game. The human players will then have to compete for second place. Please note that the advanced side of Gustave's card increases his flight distance bonuses, so be sure to note that if you use that side. The rule book contains additional rules, clarifications, and a solo mode if you're interested. Thank you so much for watching this How to Play video for First in Flight. If you enjoyed it and found it useful, I would love to hear about it in the comments below, along with any suggestions for future rule videos. And of course, please feel free to like and subscribe if you want to know about any future videos that I have going on. And until then, keep gaming. Have a safe flight. Enjoy.